Dear students, welcome to my classroom of modern Chinese history. Today I am going to discuss on certain aspects related to economic history of modern China. While discussing this history, we need to know one section of people who were very important in this regard. They played the role of a catalyst, or they were being instrumental for bringing transformations in the Chinese society in regard of its economic growth and development. They were the compradors or the agents. So, I am going to discuss on Chinese compradorial system. That system perhaps welcomed the foreign investment in China that also paved the way for the rise of communism in future. An arrangement whereby a local intermediary helped foreigners conduct trade. The compradorial system was used in various parts of East Asia. It was most prevalent in China, where it originated in the late Ming dynasty, but came to prominence in the early 1800s during the Qing dynasty. The term comprador derives from the Portuguese word for buyer. Comprador means buyer. When the monopolistic Kohong or Canton system was abolished in 1842, after the First Opium War, compradors replaced the traditional Hong merchants as the main commercial intermediaries between Chinese and Western traders. Now I can ask you a quiz on the basis of the lecture which I have just begun. So today I am going to discuss a topic from modern Chinese history which is based on religion, option number 1, society, option number 2, politics, option number 3, economy, option number 4. The right answer would be, I am going to give you some ideas related to the economic history of modern China. Even after the abolition of the Kohong monopoly, many obstacles hindered free trade. Linguistic and cultural barriers, currency differences and complexities, different weights and measures, and varying commercial and social customs. The compradorial system became more prominent after the Second Opium War, which opened more Chinese ports to foreign trade. Here we need to know that the Chinese people initially very much skeptical about the foreigners. They wanted to follow or continue the closed door policy where they were not that much eager to welcome the foreigners or to have any kind of intrusion either in their society or in their economy. And the foreigners, they faced immense problem in interacting the Chinese because the Chinese never or most of the times they did not encourage themselves to learn the languages other than their mother tongue. Gradually, they understood that it was the order of the day to give a warm welcome to the Western world or to the other countries so that with their help and support, the Chinese economy would prosper. In this situation or at this juncture, we find the emergence of the compradors. They were basically the intermediaries, and they were following the legacy of the Kohong monopoly, or the intermediaries who existed before the compradors. But their approach was new and unique and more flexible towards the foreign capitalists or the investors. By this way, the compradors, they made a prominent mark in the economic history of modern China. Western firms also used Chinese compradors in Japan, mainly at Nagasaki, the only place where the Chinese merchants had been allowed during the Tokugawa period. That period existed from 1603 to 1867 AD, and also they were allowed to do economic or commercial transactions in Yokohama of Japan. When Japanese firms started to trade in China at the end of the 19th century, they also relied on Chinese compradors. Now I can ask the second quiz to my students. Which were the ports or the trading centers in Japan where we find that compradors were allowed to have economic transactions? The option number A is Nagasaki and Yokohama. Option number 2 is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Option number 3 is Nagasaki and Tokyo. Option number 4 is Tokyo and Yokohama. The correct answer is option number 1, that is Nagasaki and Yokohama. The compradorial system was indispensable for the rise of Sino-foreign commerce. That means the commerce between the Chinese and the foreigners. Hired for their honesty and reliability, but mainly for their ability to provide customers. Compradors were critical links between Chinese commerce and foreign firms. Because foreign firms owed much of their success to their compradors, they competed for the best compradors. Compradors, they were the agents who facilitated the process of trade and commerce. They were very much useful for the foreign companies to get an exposure in China, to know the language, to know the people or the customers, and also get a taste of their culture. So from that point of view, the compradors, they were not only the people who were useful for bringing wealth or capital in China, especially in terms of foreign capital, they also acted as the people or the messengers or the agents of cultural transactions as well. Through them, the people from the other countries also got an exposure to the Chinese civilization and heritage. The incentive for hiring a comprador for even a short period was great, because a foreign firm generally kept in close touch with its comprador after he eventually became an independent merchant, thereby further widening the firm's range of potential customers. As I have already mentioned, that the compradors, they were important because they always brought customers to these companies. And sometimes the compradors later on became the traders as well, or the merchants as well, because they were very much familiar with the scenario of trade and commerce, where they started as the agents and communicated with the foreign companies. They became aware of the nitty-gritties of these economic transactions, and later they established their own firms. So their relationship with the foreign companies were based on some kind of a permanent transactions, because when they established their own companies or firms, or when they became the independent merchants, they also provided customers to those foreign firms where initially they worked as the compradors or agents, or worked for them, in other words. Some Western company officials were so dependent on their compradors that they were hardly aware of how their businesses in China functioned below the highest levels of operation. So the foreign companies, they had cordial relationship with their compradors. They used to rely to their compradors to such an extent that they perhaps not that much interfering in regard of the trading transactions which they used to have in China. They gave the entire responsibility to their compradors so that they could be able to work independently. By the end of the 19th century, compradors were among the richest men in China. Famous compradors include Zheng Guanyin, who, after working for Butterfield and Sawyer, became a prominent merchant in his own right, and in the late 1800s called for China to use commercial warfare to strengthen its modern economy. So we are talking about the compradors, their contributions, and how they helped to build up China's economy. So these compradors, they were the backbone for the growth and development of Chinese economy in her modern sense. Zhou Dachun, the comprador for Jardine and Matheson in Shanghai from the 1890s to 1900, and one of the wealthiest men in China, and Robert Ho Tung, the Eurasian comprador for Jardine and Matheson in Hong Kong from 1883 to 1900, and the richest man in the colony. So these compradors, they were the fortune seekers, and they, with their ability to provide customers and also to build up their own careers, they became the richest man of, or the richest men of their respective colonies or the states. So from that point of view, it must be stated that these compradors, they were perhaps the people who established the notion of capitalism in China. They were the forerunners or the stalwarts of establishing capitalism in China, where we find that exploitation was a pertinent issue, which gradually became more prominent with the rise of the communists, when they started talking about the plight of the working class people and the peasants. Perhaps these compradors, they used to have a strong bond with the KMT, or the Nationalist Party of China. They were basically the bourgeois people, and the KMT party also had a bourgeois agenda, that to include or usher more and more foreign capitals in China, and to exploit the peasants or the working class people and earn profit at the cost of their hard work. So from that point of view, definitely this history is not that much glorifying, but if we would like to know the continuity or the transformations in modern Chinese economy, which also helped to shape up the Chinese society as well, and the political currents, I mean, like how the communists they emerged, what was the background, how they developed their own political agenda, where economy was one of their instruments or weapons. So from that point of view, I think the history of the compradors matters. The terms comprador and compradorial have also been used to describe any type of economic or political collaboration with colonial or neo-colonial exploiters. Not only in Asia, but also in Africa and Latin America. This usage derives from criticism in the 1920s of the compradors as the running dogs of imperialism. I have just mentioned about how they ushered or how they established capitalism, or the stepping stones or the founding stones of capitalism in China. That capitalism was also an indication like how China unknowingly invited imperialism, which came as an offshoot or result of that capitalism which got an exposure in China with the help of these compradors. So compradors, they are also known as exploiters. They exploited the local people, and at the cost of their efforts or labor, they helped the foreign investors to earn profit. Definitely in this profit game, they had their own share. These compradors, they were not only noticeable in the Chinese economy, they were even in the Latin America and also in Africa. And from 1920s onwards, as I have already mentioned, that they were vehemently criticized as being the running dogs of imperialism. That means they made imperialism inevitable. They paved the way for imperialism, or because of their help, the capitalist imperialist countries, they got exposures or opportunities in various parts of Asia and Africa. So this word comprador is de-glorified by the historians, because here we find that how the compradors, just to fulfill their own interests, how they appeased the foreign companies by providing them customers by hook or crook. Chinese Marxist scholars have generally viewed the compradors as a result of China's unique semi-colonial, semi-feudal state, and as spearheads of the economic imperialism that drained China's wealth, stifled Chinese-owned enterprises, and upset China's traditionally self-sufficient economy. So here definitely we can apply the Marxian approach of exploitation and class struggle. It's very much evident that how these compradors, they flourished in the Chinese soil, where we find a society which was semi-feudal, and also the society which followed the colonial norms, not in its true sense, but definitely followed the footsteps of the colonial structure, colonial power structure to be very specific. By this way, with this unique atmosphere, the compradors, they exploited the Chinese resources and they gave utmost profit to the foreign investors, and also they became rich or prosperous out of it. It's very important to understand like how these compradors, they destroyed or destructed or ruined the self-sufficient economy of China by inviting more foreign investments, by ushering more capitalistic interventions. And here we can apply the Marxian approach of class struggle and class exploitation, or the dichotomy between the have and the have-nots, like how these compradors, they made the distinction or the divisions in the society more acute, and the differences between the rich and the poor more intense or severe. As the Marxist historians, they argued that the comprador or the compradorial system was not simply an economic arrangement, but a tool for suppressing Chinese nationalism and weakening China's sovereign rights. So, if capitalism is the most important force behind the growth of a state, then definitely the rise of nationalism was very much at a state of danger. And to eradicate the vices, the economic as well as the social vices, it's very important for a country to become self-sufficient. Unfortunately, at that time, China was not in a state to revive from the fatal blow of capitalism, or where we find the compradors were playing a leading role. And here, not only the Chinese nationalism was at a stake, but the sovereign rights in China, that means the rights of the people or democracy, was really in danger at that time. And the nationalist party, which was basically ruling the country, when the communists were not that much powerful, they always welcomed bourgeois intervention or foreign capitals at the cost of the destruction of the indigenous economy. The system eventually fostered a giant class of merchants and officials who ultimately helped foreign firms influence China's economy and government in the late 1800 and early 1900. According to this argument, through their compradors, the foreigners were able not only to open Chinese markets, but also to have their influence in the traditional guilds, hongs, and other commercial organizations. Force the Qing government to implement Western-style enterprises and ultimately to control most of China's largest industries, exports and imports, and shipping. For scholars who believe that international trade and investment was beneficial to China's economic development, however, the compradors were heroes rather than villains. So here perception matters. For some people, basically for the Marxist economic historians, they never appreciated the compradors. They always criticized them as the agents for giving profits to the foreign nationals as well as to become rich at the cost of others' labor. But on the other hand, there were the social scientists who thought from the perspective of China's growth and development. In terms of economy, they thought perhaps the intrusion or the intervention of the compradors was a blessing. As the first Chinese to invest in modern enterprises, they were crucial to China's industrialization and economic modernization. They created external economies, promoted a national market, stimulated mercantile nationalism, and channeled Chinese savings into modern investments. Furthermore, because the compradors eventually became the rivals of the Western firms, they ended up curbing foreign economic intrusion. So they gave a strong competition to the foreign capitalists, and sometimes they also won the game as well and made their presence more prominent in the economic scenario than the foreign investors. The compradorial system began to decline in the early 1900s, mainly because foreign merchants became more knowledgeable about China, while Chinese merchants became more experienced in foreign trade, but also because the development of modern banking and credit services made the system less necessary. So when people started getting an exposure of modern banking and credit system, then the need for appointing the traditional agents or compradors was not that much, as people started giving more emphasis on technology and also on international relationship rather than the rely on those agents who once upon a time helped the foreign investors to get an exposure to the culture, economy and society of an alien nation. So in due course of time, when the foreigners vis-a-vis the Chinese people, they came to know about each other, that definitely facilitated the economic transactions as well. That reduced the need or the necessity of keeping the compradors or to maintain the compradorial system. Still, most foreign companies in China continued to rely on Chinese managers or Chinese agents, whereas the compradorial system survived in Hong Kong until after Second World War. That was from 1939 to 1945. The compradorial system made the mercantile ruling classes prosperous from the middleman's profit. They were dependent on international trade with no control over either the producing or consuming ends. So the compradors helped to flourish the foreign investors and they established their monopoly. In theories of economic globalization, the term comprador is used to designate groups in developing countries who align themselves with multinational capital and promote its interests. Remnants of the compradorial system in East Africa still survive in Zanzibar, Mombasa, and Dar es Salaam. Now I would like to give you an idea about the references which we may use for this lecture or to prepare our study materials. The first book which I would like to refer, the book by G.C. Allen and others. The book is on Western Enterprise in Far Eastern Economic Development, China and Japan. The second book is written by Howe, and the name of the book is The Comprador in 19th Century China, Bridge Between East and West. So these two books will help the students to get more ideas on Chinese compradorial system. This topic is not that much discussed, and the resources to know this topic are scanty in nature. But definitely, the idea about Chinese compradorial system will help the students to know the economic system all over the world. Especially, we can also refer the role of the compradors to understand the Indian economy in its modern sense. Here, one book by Suniti Kumar Ghosh, The Indian Big Bourgeois, will be really helpful for the students, where they will be able to get an idea about the meaning of the term comprador. So, we have discussed the history of the compradorial system, the role of the Chinese compradors, and its worldwide significance, and some of the references, and also how we can relate this particular topic to know the condition of modern Indian economy with the help of the book by Suniti Kumar Ghosh, The Indian Big Bourgeois. Thank you so much for listening to my lecture. Hope my students have enjoyed it.